Just hours after a violent mob of Trump supporters broke into the United States Capitol in an attempt to stop the certification of a presidential election, take that in, that happened. It's hard to believe even today, even though we saw it. Then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he was, quote, exhilarated the insurrection could potentially hurt Donald Trump. Here's how the Washington Post reports on McConnell's comments. Quote, I feel exhilarated by the fact that this fellow finally totally discredited himself. McConnell told Jonathan Martin, one of the authors of the new book entitled This Will Not Pass, when asked about his feelings on the violence and the rioters. He put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger, he said. Standing in the doorway of the Capitol after midnight couldn't have happened at a better time. The book, as reported by the Washington Post, alleges McConnell asked Martin what he heard about invoking the 25th Amendment and that he had spoken with Democratic leadership about issuing a joint statement telling Trump not to attend the inauguration. The authors write that Senator McConnell planned to cut into Trump's influence on the GOP in the upcoming midterms, similar to how he weeded out far-right candidates in 2014. We crushed the sons of you-know-whats, he said to Martin, according to the book, adding, and that's what we're going to do in the primary in 22. A spokesman for Senator McConnell declined to comment on the book. Despite his strong stance against Trump in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, just weeks later, McConnell voted with the majority of Senate Republicans to absolve him of any punishment. McConnell's office declined to comment on the quotes when asked by NBC News. And again, it makes me think of the Jonathan Swan interview with Mitch McConnell. I mean, they don't care. And deep inside from this reporting that it was like, oh, the witch is dead. Thank God we can move on with our lives. Finally, he's gone. But then when he's not, they fall back into form.
Yeah, the problem is none of them were willing to do anything about him.
Why?
That's the amazing question. This was the moment that he had been waiting for, and he was the one who could have stuck the final knife into Trump by holding an early impeachment trial, and then ultimately by convicting him at that. And he didn't do it because he thought, oh, guy's going to go away on his own. He did it to himself. And he must have been pretty confident of that at that moment to say that to a New York Times reporter who was writing a book.
It's also political survival. It happened in a matter of weeks. They saw that the Trump base, the Republican base, didn't care. And they flipped really quickly, at least publicly. You saw the comments he made to Jonathan Martin in private, came ahead of his comments he made publicly after Trump's impeachment. He didn't vote for the impeachment, but he didn't vote to convict him.
Yeah.
But you saw his blistering speech on the floor.
Yeah.
But after that, they made the determination that it was in their interest of the Republican Party to continue to support Donald Trump.
That is a choice, though.
Yeah.
They did make a choice.
Well, I just think, I think, Willie, it's also added into this. It's sort of a nebulous part of what's going on around this is I think over the past 4 years, Americans, voters, everybody in every industry has become, people who cover Trump, desensitized to what's bad. To the point where they don't care.
In some respects, yes, but January 6th was something different entirely. Anybody who watched what was happening either in person or on their televisions knew that this cannot happen in America. And there was a moment, and we're hearing behind the scenes. We heard last week Jonathan Lemire from the same book, from Alex Burns and Jonathan Martin, Kevin McCarthy on tape talking to Liz Cheney about maybe we should explore the 25th Amendment. I'm going to call him and tell him he should resign. I should get a bunch of Republicans off Twitter. They're dangerous, House members, certain members. And yet, as everyone on the panel in Washington has been saying, the core contradiction of our time in the Republican Party is privately, we hate this guy. We wish he would go away. Publicly, we can't quit him.
Yeah, there was a fleeting moment where they could have rid the party of Donald Trump, or at least made a real effort to do so. And yes, perhaps Mitch McConnell thought that Trump would just go away, but there was something else at play here. They read the room. McConnell and McCarthy looked at their own caucuses. They looked at their own party members. They looked at the polls and realized how popular Donald Trump still was. So McConnell, the impeachment trial happened after Trump was out of office, and there were few Republicans willing to convict. There were a handful, but not enough. McConnell realized had he gone in that direction, he could have lost the support of his members. He voted to acquit. Yes, he publicly denounced Trump, but he voted to acquit on very narrow grounds. He was saying that because, he's already out of office, so therefore there's no point in removing him now. But if he had done so, and let's remember the argument that Senator Schumer had made at that point, that if Trump was removed from office, they might have been able to also ban him from seeking federal office again. Right. That, of course, did not come to be. And yes, did McConnell deliver a blistering speech denouncing Trump during that trial? Yes, he did. Did he vote to acquit? Yes, he did. 2 weeks later, he was asked if he would support and vote for Donald Trump again. He said, yes, I would. And he has not changed his tone ever since.
And 3 weeks after that phone call with Liz Cheney, Kevin McCarthy was at Mar-a-Lago taking a photograph and reassuring Donald Trump he was still in his pocket. George Conway, I guess this is all about power. So if Kevin McCarthy becomes Speaker of the House in a few months from now, he will have been vindicated in his own mind because he will have said, I am now the leader of this party in the House of Representatives, and we call the shots because I stood by the side of Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And he lied for Donald Trump. And then he lied about lying for Donald Trump. And he lied about lying lying for Donald Trump. That's what we've seen in the last week, just from that one man alone. I mean, that's just what they do. And that's the way they show their loyalty, and they have no compunction.
So what's behind that? I feel like there's a missing link, Jackie Alemany. I mean, that they change back after even the brink here with Mitch McConnell going, finally, we're done with this guy.
So there's certainly an element of political expediency here, but that question of what changed is something that the committee is seeking, and that's why they want to speak to House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. They want to know what his conversation with the former president was when he went down to Mar-a-Lago, when he did that 180-degree pivot and all of a sudden was pro-Trump after the week before had just been discussing potentially invoking the 25th Amendment, that whether or not there was some sort of fundraising threat or if it was just a realization that the money was drying up. Corporations were pulling out of supporting any Republicans, and Republicans realized from a leadership perspective that they needed Trump's grassroots operations to continue to keep their members afloat, or if it was really at the end of the day, there is no smoking gun here, and it was just a matter of members went home, their supporters did not care what happened, still supported Trump, and they had to come back and do what their constituents wanted.
All right, Jackie Alemany and George Conway, thank you both very much for coming on this morning. Up next, the former president's troubles don't stop. At January 6th, NBC's Tom Winter joins us with new reporting on a legal victory for New York Attorney General's office and its probe in the Trump Organization. Morning Joe is coming right back.